Okay, so welcome back to my channel. I came across another show that I think I might like and may try to get into, called Absentia. Now, as I've said before, I don't have cable, so I'm not actually able to see these shows when they air. I can only watch them after they've hit either Netflix or Amazon Prime. And so the goal is, after my move, which hopefully should be within the next week or so, I can get everything set up. And so when the new season starts on a lot of these shows, I'm able to watch them as they air. But right now, I can only watch them after the season has been uploaded to one of the programs. So I watched the first episode of Absentia today, and I thought, okay, I think I'm really gonna like this show. And so it's my kind of show. Now, I watch a little bit of everything, but I do enjoy like the Criminal Minds and Law and Order kind of shows. So, and it kept popping up on like my recommendations, and based on what you've seen before, Amazon or Netflix will recommend certain shows to you. So I sat down today and I watched the first episode, and I thought, you know what, let me just come in and do a quick review. And I see it's only maybe 10 episodes in the season, so I think I'm just going to watch one episode a week, even though they've already uploaded, and just come back and do like just a quick recap. Okay, so basically the premise of the show, at least for the season, is that Agent Emily is a FBI agent who disappeared. Nobody knows what happened. She had been gone for, I believe, at least 6 years, and so she was presumed dead. So everyone had, basically they had a service for her. She has a grave, a headstone, the whole thing. And so people, life after 6 years, life has pretty much moved on. The thing is that she had a son who was probably roughly around 3 years old when she disappeared. She was, I don't think that her and the father was married, but they were living together. But she disappeared. Her husband, also Nick, is also an FBI agent. The person who was convicted for her murder was named Conrad Harlow. And he was actually suspected in killing a number of people. And he had this calling card. His victims, he would cut off their eyelids. And so he was eventually convicted of her disappearance and presumed death, and was sentenced to life in prison. Okay, so the show basically opens with just some family videos playing of Emily with her son Flynn and Nick. And, it's basically showing them as this happy family. It looked like, they had it all together. They both had what seemed to be, I guess, stellar careers. They had this family. They had the son. They had the home. They had what people would consider like the American dream, right? Until, up until her disappearance. And so it was, what you quickly realize is that it was a memory of hers. So it quickly flashed to her. She's basically in some room where she's being tortured. I mean, somebody's in there kicking her ass. She's all bloodied and bruised. She's like half naked. I mean, she's all just messed up, right? And eventually, I'm assuming she passed out, or someone knocked her out, whoever this person is. And so she comes to realizing that she's in a glass coffin, what appears to be a glass coffin. And so water starts pouring into this thing. So of course, her first instinct, she panics. She's trying to break the glass. I mean, she's doing everything that she can. Okay. So it flashes to Conrad Harlow's trial, where he actually stands up and the judge actually hands down his sentence, and with the life in prison. Okay, so Nick is in the courtroom, obviously, at the time that this is going on, and he's been convicted. And so as the bailiffs are escorting Harlow Conrad out of the court, I guess through the back door, because obviously the front of the courthouse is just swarming with journalists. So they get him out through the back to, I guess, get him all situated into the van to take him off to prison. And Nick kind of runs up and basically begging him. He's trying to get to this guy, like, what happened to her? What did you do with her? Where is she? Because obviously at this point they've buried an empty coffin. They have no idea what happened to her. And so, the bailiffs restrain him, and the other ones take him and put him in the van, and he doesn't get any answers to his questions. Okay, so flash to flash to later on that night. Now at this point, Nick has remarried to a woman. She's married to a woman named Alice. And as far as Flynn knows, Flynn knows that Alice isn't his biological mother, but Alice is the only mother he's ever known. Later on that night, Nick receives a phone call, and it's from Harlow, or there's a voice on the phone that sounds very similar to Harlow, and he's basically telling Nick that you have a second chance to save her, and you have about 60 minutes, give or take, and he basically gives Nick the address to where Emily is being held. So of course, he, jumps up, like he's in a panic. He, jumps up. His Alice is trying to figure out, well, what's going on? What's going on? He is not answering her. He is focused on getting himself together. He's on the phone calling other officers, letting them know that Harlow just called me, and he's telling me where Emily is, and I'm on my way there, and then he back up. And the whole time, Allison's running around the house trying to get his test. Like, what is going on? Tell me what in the world is going on. He jumps in the car and just speeds off, right? So, that left her feeling some kind of way. So they arrive at the location. It's a cabin. They go in. You got the SWAT team. They got all their gear on. They go in. At first glance, it looks empty. It just looks like an empty cabin. And then, I don't know what drew his attention to the floor, but he kind of looks at the floor, and he's peering between the floorboards, and he realizes there's another room underneath. And so they start ripping the floor up and drops down, and, it's dark at this point. And so they find her. So he eventually finds her, and now at this point, they are frantically trying to break open this glass coffin because she's still alive. So I'm assuming it took that long for the tank to fill up, about the 60 minutes, the time frame he was given them, because she was still alive. She saw him, he's panicking. They're trying to break it open. Even with the guns, they can't get this thing open. He has like this padlock on the container that is counting down. So initially they think it's a bomb. So it's like counting down, and he was like telling everybody to back away, but it actually, once it counted down, it actually released. So the bottom fell off. He was actually able to pull the lock out and open it and pull her out. And so, just in the nick of time, they get her out of the water. And, the next thing you see is she's being loaded into the ambulance. You can tell she's, they're trying to get her stabilized. And of course, they're trying to put the mask on her. So she's disoriented. She's kind of in and out of consciousness. And so, but they attempt to put the mask on her, and she freaks out. And I think it has something to do, she's been underwater, kind of like her breath. It probably was like in this flashback of her being in the water, not being able to breathe, and it was just somebody covering her. It was the machine, the thing covering her mouth and her nose. It freaked her out, and so she was having some sort of fit. They ended up having to restrain her, and eventually they were able to get her calmed down and got her to the hospital. So they get her to the hospital. They take her back, and Nick calls Jack. Jack is Emily's brother. He arrives at the hospital. At this point, they don't know what's going on. They're still back there working on her. She's all cut up. Obviously, she's in and out of consciousness. She's been underwater for a certain amount of time, and so they're just waiting to hear what's going on. So while they're waiting to hear what's going on, he tries to call Alice. So you flash to Alice. Alice is in the shower. She has the news playing in the background. You can hear the phone ringing where he's trying to call her, and she's like just in the shower, frozen. Look, she actually looks she looked scared. Like, at this point, I don't, it's unclear. I can imagine that she's very, terrified. Like she may feel like her position in the family is threatened at this point, because I think she knows that Nick still has feelings for her, and Flynn is her biological child. So at this point, I think she's kind of thinking about all of the insecurities that she has as far as the security of her position in their lives at this point. So at that point, she didn't answer. She was in the shower, and she was just in her own little world. So the doctor eventually comes out, and they basically tell them that she's stable, that she's having some issues breathing because she was underwater. So her throat, it's like the muscles, because she was underwater so long, it keeps contracting, and so they're trying to get her stabilized, get her able to breathe, and just working on her. Basically, that was that. And so at that point, the doctor was like, we just need her to rest. And so they really didn't want anybody to go back to see her. She just needs to rest. And so Nick, he eventually goes back to the office because remember, he's an FBI agent. And so he gets to the office, and that's when you see Adam, who, as I'm assuming their boss, he runs the whole show. And so you can hear the officers who were on site going over everything that they saw. They're recounting, I guess, the phone call, whatever he's relayed to them at this point. And they're really trying to figure out, okay, what's been going on? Because remember, this woman, this FBI agent, has been gone for 6 years. And nobody knows what's going on. So it's like, that whole, she's one of her own. So we need to figure out what the hell happened to her, what's been going on, where she's been all these past 6 years. And so eventually, it seems like everybody has their assignments, their tasks, they know what they're supposed to do. And so Adam tells Nick, okay, go through Emily's case files to see who would basically have a motive or have it out for her. So you flash to Emily. She's having some sort of nightmare. And so she wakes up. Because remember, she was basically unconscious when they took her to the hospital. So she wakes up. She's already disoriented because, she's been under whatever, sedation they've given her for when she initially came in. She doesn't know where she is. And so the next thing you hear, I think she either heard the person walking towards her, but I don't know what she grabbed off the stand. I don't know if it was a pen, a pencil or something. I don't know. But she ends up jumping on some woman and stabbing the shit out of her in her shoulder, right? And so it was this whole thing. The woman is screaming. Then you see the badge or whatever this thing is fall over. I think it was she's a journalist. Her journalism pass or something. I forget what it is. It was actually a journalist who snuck into her room, basically. So that bitch kind of got what she deserved, right? But anyway, so the doctors came in. And I think maybe they may have had a guard, or a guard was supposed to be on the room. Everybody rushes in. They get Emily sedated. They get her together. They get the journalist out. Nick gets to the hospital. He's like, I heard he saw Jack. And this is where you see Dr. VEGA, who's a therapist. And they're standing outside talking, and Nick walks up and like, I heard what happened with what is going on. And Jack is like, no, she's fine. She's fine. Everything's okay. She's in the room. So she's in the room. Her father's in there sitting next to the bed. And, she started calling out, I think she said Flynn's name or something. And her father was like, she wants to see her son. Now, remember the last time she saw Flynn, he was, 3 years old. So, Nick sits down and he, pulls up a recent photo of Flynn on his phone, and she shows it to him, and he shows it to her, and I don't know if she made some comment about how he looked, and that's when he told her that you've been gone for 6 years, and of course she's taken aback, and they have a moment, and then eventually everybody leaves the room so they could talk because they built this life together. They had this child, and it's like where do they even begin, right? And so he basically, puts his hand on her hand, and that's when she sees the wedding band on his finger. And so she stares at it for a long time, and then he, notices her looking at it, and he kind of moves his hand away. She basically turned away. He left, and he just had he broke down emotionally. Because, I'm assuming this is the woman that he loved, this woman he wanted to spend his life with, and then whoever this person was that took her, and then it was a lot. It was a lot. In the last 6 years, he thought she was dead, and he's been, he had to come to terms with her death and then move on, and he's now married and has this life now, and it's like, it was a lot. So he had an emotional, they both did, but he really broke down. So after that, Nick actually goes to the prison to meet with Harlow. And so Harlow was like, I guess you're here based on this phone call I allegedly made. And so Nick is like, okay, well, I want you to tell me, so who's been working with you? Who took her? Who did you talk to really have her released? Basically, what is your involvement in this? Nick was like, and so Harlow was basically like, so let's talk about my release. Because remember, the only murder that he was convicted for was hers. But now that she's not dead, now it just looks like it's just a miscarriage of justice, and this man has spent the last 6 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. So he's like, let's talk about my release. And so Nick basically threatens him, is like, basically, I can make your life a living hell in here. And Harlow shoots back, I think basically you need to focus on doing a better job at protecting your wife this time. And so that sets Nick off. Nick, I think, head busts the shit out of him and jumps up and he's choking this man down, right? And so the security guys had to run in and pull him off the man. It was just a whole mess, right? Emily is actually, so Dr. Vega's down in the room talking to Emily, and she's basically trying to recount basically trying to piece together the fragments of her memory about what happened. And so basically all you see a bunch of flashes, and she's saying that she didn't see the person, and basically that was the gist of it. At this point, she doesn't really have anything that she can give them with any information that she can give them with any clarity at this point. And so she basically said that she just wants to go home. She wants to go home. Now, okay, where's home, you might ask? Okay, so Jack is there, and he's helping her get herself together, and she helping her pack her bag, and he's like, maybe he's trying to, convince her to stay a little while longer, and she's like, no, she just wants to get out of there, and so she wants to go, so he takes her to, what's now Nick out and Allison's home, and so they know she's coming, and so, Nick is trying to fix the dishwasher. So the dishwasher is overflowing. There's water all over the floor. Allison is like, I asked you to fix this. Why would you fix it? And he's like, I've had a lot on my mind. I'm sorry I didn't fix it. I've had a lot on my mind. And so obviously, this argument, it's, the dishwasher overflowing is inconvenient, obviously. But you can tell by the argument, obviously, it's that it wasn't about the dishwasher. It's, it's just the stress of everything, right? And so, Flynn is in his bedroom and he's listening to this entire argument, and so it makes him feel some kind of way. Emily comes into the house, and the first person she sees is Alice. And so they see each other. I'm not sure how, at this point, it's not unsure of how familiar they are with each other, but then the dog walks out. I forget the dog's name. Allison, they had, the dog remembered, the dog remembered Emily. She got the dog when the dog was a puppy. So the dog actually just walked over to Emily and was very, just do a dog, look at her face and all of that. She was like, petting the dog and, just that whole situation. So then Flynn walks downstairs. And he stood there for a while on the steps just looking at her. And of course, she's in shock because, again, she hasn't seen this boy in so many years. And so he walks over to Allison. And Nick eventually comes out. And Nick is standing next to Allison. And Flynn walks down. And he stands next to Alice. And so Emily, kind of asks him, instructs him to come over to her. And of course, she has this emotional moment because, she hadn't seen this boy. She's missed so much of his life. And so she's, hugging him and kissing him. And you can tell it's a lot for him. He looks to be about maybe 10 years old. So, it's a lot for him. And so Allison said, Flynn, why don't you show her your room? And so just before they were going to walk up, the washing machine, this washer started making some kind of weird noise that kind of stopped her in her tracks because it was a trigger. She flashed back to, I could think, being back in that room where she was locked in, where the guy was, whoever this was, I don't even know if it's a guy, was beating the crap out of her. But she snaps back and she walks upstairs to Flynn's room. So she walks up and he sits on the bed, and he said, well, you can sit down, you can sit on the bed if you want. She sat down and she initially apologized for, just being overly emotional downstairs because she could tell that it made him kind of uncomfortable. And so Flynn looks at her and he says, you hurt my mom. And Emily was like, well, she's confused, like, well, how did I do that? And Flynn was like, well, they were fighting. They never fight. He was talking about the whole argument with the garbage disposal. And so she kind of looks kind of like, okay. And so she reached out to touch his hand, and he pulled away from her. And that kind of, you could tell that kind of was like a dagger in the heart, right? So the next thing you see is her tearing out of the house. She's running towards the car. So she's like bawling because she knows this boy, he doesn't know her. He doesn't have a connection to her. She's a stranger. She's his biological mother, and of course, she didn't leave of her own free will. So that's what makes it so. What's making it so complicated. It's not like she just up and left them. it's like she was taken and people have had to build a life without her. And so it's now her trying to figure out how she fits in to everyone's life again. And so Nick runs out behind her and he's hugging her and consoling her. He's like, what is going on? And she was like, I can't do this. You know, it's just too much. And he's basically like, don't give up on me. Don't give up on us. And basically, it's going to take, trying to explain to her, it's going to take time. And this woman, I mean, I understand she's hurt. But then she said, she told Nick, just go back in the house she said, just go back in the house with your wife. So Nick is standing there, half in shock, half hurt. And she gets in the car and Jack, drives off. So she's actually staying with Jack at this point, her brother. But Nick was just stunned, like, how could you stand there and say this to me? So she's obviously, at this point, she resents the fact that he moved on. They're at Jack's house. I'm assuming at one point, Jack was a doctor. And so she's kind of looking around his apartment. He's in this apartment. I mean, it doesn't look like the best apartment, but it is what it is. And so he basically said that he lost his license and that he sells medical supplies now. And so then he pulls out this coin or chip. So he didn't specify whether or not it was alcohol or drugs or whatever. But basically he had some addiction and that he was like 2.5 years clean. So he was doing fine. And, he pointed her to some flowers. Like, oh, your FBI friends, they had dropped some flowers off for you. So they went in the kitchen and she saw the flowers. And, of course, they kind of worked out their sleeping arrangements. And that was the gist of that scene. So Nick is back at the office, and he's going over her files, and he's watching her interview. Apparently, she did a taped interview, and Emily is talking to Dr. VEGA, and she's basically talking to him about how to recover her memory. She was throwing out I think it's a sodium amytal that tells people. I don't know if that helps with memory or the truth. I don't know what it was. Basically, she had recommended something. He was like, well, no, that's not going to be, that's not an effective course for this. And he basically recommended something else, right? And so she sat down and she closed her eyes and she started rattling off flowers. Like it was a memory of hers, right? And so based on the flowers that she was rattling off, Nick was like, it's something that stuck out to him after, going through her case files. And he realized that it was some guy, Robert Samaroff or something like that. And that was basically the flowers that she named off were the names he used to name the women who were his favorite. He was a human trafficker. And so that was the first thing, the first clue of what may have happened to her, right? And so, he's talking to Adam. And so now the goal now is to find Robert Samaroff, right? So Nick goes to Jack's place to talk to her. And of course, she's upset and, again, still angry that he moved on. And so he started asking her about the flowers. And he said, well, the only reason I came is because based on your interview, I saw the flowers and the flowers that you named was the same flowers that was in this case file, And then she made the connection. So she walked away and she walked into the kitchen. And the flowers that she named were the exact same flowers that were in the kitchen on the counter that Jack thought was left by her coworkers at the FBI. And so Nick is like, okay, don't touch the flowers, just put them down. And he called for forensics to come and get the flowers and do whatever test they needed to do. So I'm going to jump back a little bit. So when Emily was in that glass, after the whole scene with Emily being in that glass coffin and she's fighting, trying to get out, it flashes to a team. They were a rowing team. I guess they were practicing or whatever. And so you saw this body that bobbed up, and they saw this body. They end up calling, obviously, the police. The police came, and this is when Tom came in. Tom is a local police officer. So the case is on his desk. So he went out to the scene, saw the body, and they saw that, got to the ME's office and saw that the eyelids had been removed. So this was allegedly Conrad Harlow's calling card. So we're going to flash forward here. The body, so they're out here looking for Robert Samroff. And so what they realize is that Emily was undercover and she was investigating him for this sex trafficking ring that he was involved in. And so they realized that Emily was kind of keeping things from them. And so she wanted to be a part of the case, right? And so, of course, Adam and Nick was like, no, you're not ready for this. And she's trying to convince them, yes, I am. I'm fine. I'm fine. You know, I can handle it. And she was like, basically, this person kidnapped me, and I want to be there when he gets arrested, and da-da-da. And so, basically, her whole thing was, I'm not going to release any information unless I'm going to be a part of the case. And so they reluctantly agreed to do that. And so eventually she gave them some information that led them to a warehouse. And so the FBI is there, and what they saw some people, they were talking, they were kind of milling around. I think they may have exchanged some money, whatever the case. There was a truck that they eventually opened, and all of these women start pouring out. And that's when the FBI burst out and they start taking people into custody. And there was this guy that they initially thought was Samroff, but it wasn't. And Nick was questioning him, trying to figure out where Samroff, trying to get him to tell him where Samroff was. And so Emily walks up, pushes Nick out of the way, and starts beating the shit out of this guy. Nick and Adam had to pull her off this guy, and Nick basically threw her ass in the back of a police car. So while all this was going on, one of the FBI agents received a call, and this was basically after the DNA testing and all this came back from the body they pulled out of the water. And so he ends up telling Adam, okay, so basically there's a reason for us to look for Robert Samroff anymore. And he was like, wow, what are you talking about? The body they pulled out of the water was Robert Samroff, and the DNA, they found some DNA under his nails that belonged to Emily. And so basically, after Nick got Emily in the back of the car, he walks over to them, and they're kind of giving him this look, and Nick is just standing there like, what's going on? And that's basically how this episode ends. So I'm going to leave this video here, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.